what we've been doing for, since the beginning of time, taking care of those we love. I watched so many people do it before we knew what the term was. My grandmother, her mother, my mother, and who never heard this term. I just heard it maybe 11 years ago. But once I heard it, it just clicked. It was like, oh, that makes sense. That's exactly
Yeah.
what that is. But we just did it because it was love. We took care of family. We took care of friends. Yeah, out of love, and it's offering that emotional support, that spiritual support, sometimes physical support, um, and creating these safe spaces for people to transition and with dignity, with love, and not being so alone.
Howdy, y'all, and welcome back to another awesome episode of NICU Heroes. We have talked about some great topics this year. I think if you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, you know that I don't shy away from talking about hard things. And today we're talking about death, particularly death doulas, what their role can be in the NICU. And honestly, you as a NICU nurse, as a NICU professional, probably are doing much of what death doulas do. You may just not have realized that that's what you were doing. And so I hope my conversation today with Darnell gives you a glimpse into what a death doula does and how can you better accompany a family, whether or not they have a death doula with them or not, but what are some ways in which you can accompany these families, be present to these families, and ways in which you can serve them better so that they can get to the important work of celebrating the life of their child and not getting bogged down with some of the other things. So I'm really grateful for this conversation with Darnell today. I hope that you love it. My guest today is Darnell Walker. He's a death doula, an Emmy-nominated children's television writer, producer, and explorer. He was born in Charlottesville, Virginia, and he creates spaces worldwide for healing through storytelling, end-of-life care, and workshops on grief, resilience, unlocking the rider within, and radical empathy. He joyfully lives in the Chattahoochee National Forest of North Georgia, and I'm so looking forward to this conversation. So let's get to it. Well, on the podcast before, we've never been shy about talking about death, and today we're going to dive a little bit deeper, and I'm really grateful to have Darnell here today. So Darnell, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
Well, we often hear about death and grief in the NICU because most families are grieving something. They're either grieving the experience that they thought that they were going to have, or in some
Mhm.
cases, they're grieving the loss of their baby or their babies. And so grief is something that I think sort of permeates the NICU. It's just the way in which we approach it. And I know that while people hear death or they hear grief, they may not have heard of the term death doula. So let's start there. What is a death doula? Because I think people might hear that and be like, "Is that new? What is that?" So let's talk about that.
No, absolutely. In general, I always like to say that a death doula is someone who accompanies an individual or family at the end of life. It's usually that plain, that simple. It's nothing new. It's what we've been doing for, since the beginning of time, taking care of those we love. I watched so many people do it before we knew what the term was. My grandmother, her mother, my mother, and who never heard this term. I just heard it maybe 11 years ago. But once I heard it, it just clicked. It was like, oh, that makes sense. That's exactly
Yeah.
what that is. But we just did it because it was love. We took care of family. We took care of friends. Yeah, out of love, and it's offering that emotional support, that spiritual support, sometimes physical support, um, and creating these safe spaces for people to transition and with dignity, with love, and not being so alone.
Well, you've had this really beautiful career in the way in which you've sort of used your gifts and your talents with the world. But at what point, Darnell, did you say, I think death doula is something that I feel called to do? And
Mhm.
I'm not sure that too many kids think it when they're growing up. I know what I want to grow up and be, although it doesn't make it any less important. But I'm curious
Yeah.
when the shift happened and then why the shift.
No, absolutely. It wasn't something I even thought about as a kid. And it's strange because I look back and I see all these I see where all the dots connect. I have been doing this work unofficially since I was about 9 years old. But it wasn't until and by unofficially, I mean I, sat with my family when I was nine, and me and my grandmother were the only two who were on that side of the family, my dad's side, who were open to talking about death. And so it was me being there with my cousins, being there with my dad and uncles and aunts and whatnot. And then at 12 was the first time I was actually there for someone at the end of their life. And 13, I was volunteering at a hospice, holding grief circles at recess in middle school. And these were all just one-off things and things that this is just what family does. But it wasn't until about 11 years ago when I was having a conversation with a friend who's a hospice nurse. And I'm telling her about these experiences. And she says, "Oh, it sounds like you're a death doula." And I'd never heard it. And I look it up. I'm like, "Well, what is a death doula?" And so I'm Googling, and then I go down this rabbit hole, and everything I could get my hands on and my eyes on. Um, I'm like, this is exactly what I've been doing for the last, couple of decades, I think, at that point. And at that moment, as soon as she says it and I look it up within maybe a minute, it was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, and then everything made sense. And so it went from, oh, this is just what we do, to this is what I have to do
Oh,
in that
that's
moment.
good. That's good. Well, I wouldn't characterize culturally Americans as being very good at accompanying people or even talking about death. I don't think
Yeah,
that's an overstatement. While there are certain groups of people that I think accompany people well, I think as a whole, we've sort of been a little reticent to even talk about death and talk about
yeah.
dying and grieving. So when you enter into a space, Darnell, do you find that that's a conversation that you have to first have is maybe let's talk about what's actually happening, or do you feel like you're able to accompany people? Give me an idea of what that looks like.
No, that's a great question. It is, I would say at least 99% of the time, it's me coming in and having to start with that conversation. Um, no matter where the client is on the journey, on this journey toward the end, whether, it's a couple of hours before the end, or maybe sometimes months. No one has asked the question of how do you want this to go, or has said, this is happening. What do you want? And so I come in and I have to remind everyone a lot of times that death is coming. This is what the situation is. And so now that we know this, where do you want this to go? How do you want this to go? What do you want to happen? And so and a lot of it's hard. It is hard for a lot of folks. And it's one of those, a lot of times it's, if we don't bring it up, then we can put it off for a little bit longer. If
Yeah.
we don't bring it up, it might not happen. And it's, so I come in, I'm like, no, this is happening. And if we can bring it up, some beautiful things can happen if we're open to talking about it, and we can get you as close to that death that you want as possible. Um, and so it's so important for me to bring everyone else around to where I am when I come into the room.
So, in the case of parents who are in the neonatal intensive care unit, sometimes they give birth to a baby and they know that their time is limited. Maybe there was some prenatal testing or some diagnoses that happened early on. And so they know what they're staring down. And then sometimes they have a completely normal pregnancy and then it all goes south and they find themselves in the NICU and it's unexpected, or things were going well and then all of a sudden they weren't. How does the conversation shift or change for people that know that death is coming and for people who are surprised that death is coming?
Yeah, for those who know, it's a lot of times it's because they've lived with this thought, they lived with this knowing, they are more open to talking about or they've had time to think about how they want that end to go. And so I get to come in and we can get to planning right away. A lot of times it's okay. Well, I know this is happening, and it doesn't make it any any less hard. But
Yeah.
we can talk about what happens, what happens at that moment. Where do we go at that moment, and how do we build up to this? And for me, it can look like, I want family there. This is who I want to be here when this happens. This is what I want to leave behind, or what I want to write down and be remembered and to be witnessed. And so we can get to the not good stuff, but we can get to the stuff
Yeah.
that we normally postpone when the conversation when the person hasn't fully accepted it yet. Um,
Yeah.
a lot faster. Yeah.
So, Darnell, when someone is in the hospital, most NICU babies,
Mhm.
if a parent's in that space, how do they how do they get to know you? How do they like? Is there a phone book? Is there a website? Like, if someone feels like we know that death may be imminent for our baby, and I don't know how to do it, and I want to do it well,
Mhm.
where do they go if they want someone to accompany them through that, aside from maybe the NICU nurse or the NICU doctors that are there in the hospital with them?
Oh no, absolutely. There are so many websites now. There are so many people who are just ready for that phone call. I talked about what a death duel is, but then we all bring so much of ourselves into this work as well. And so
Yeah.
I tell people it's understanding what it is you need from someone, and then it's so easy to find that there are companies like Eneldo, which is an end of life doula association, and then it's Going with Grace, and then just typing in death doula, especially if you're in the NICU. It's such um, a special place, and so there
Yeah.
are a lot of NICU, sometimes current NICU nurses and sometimes former NICU nurses who have come into this work because they've seen the need for it, and so they come with that experience. They come with the love and the space to really make something special happen for families that are going through this. And so, and for me, it's a lot of uh, I'm everywhere. I'm like, I'm all over. Darnell Walker. I can be found just about everywhere, and I'm always willing to have the conversation. Always willing um, to share my resources and say this is how. I don't particularly work with this group of folks. Like I'm always open to saying that, like, oh, I don't do bedside vigils, or I don't help plan this part of the end of life, but I know someone who can, um, and will make the phone calls and help do that as well.
I hadn't even thought about that when you were talking about NICU nurses, sort of the segue between what they do and then they often accompany people
Mhm.
in grieving and dying. And I hadn't even thought about they probably are one of the first people that when a when a family sees that it's coming, or when
Mhm.
it happens, the relationship, I will say, the relationship with a family and a NICU nurse is very tender, very precious. It's the person that knows their baby, at least in our case, that knew our baby the best.
Mhm.
So when you're thinking about giving advice maybe to someone who is maybe not as seasoned, because I know sometimes when you've been in the NICU for a while, nothing beats experience. But maybe if this is a new thing for you, maybe this is the first time or the first handful of times that you've had to accompany a family through something that's this difficult, what do you think would be helpful for them to hear so that they can accompany them well?
Yeah, you can't go in with any assumptions, with any expectations. It's all about, like, this work deals heavily with presence. It's all about presence, and it's all about listening. And so to just go in and say, I'm here, and I'm here to witness, and I'm here to listen to what's happening, and then from there I can figure out where I fit in and how I can best help you. Um, and because we go in and it's, oh, I know I can go in and I know how exactly how I'm going to help these people. And I know how I'm going to help them get through it. And you get through there and that whole plan just falls apart because it's like this
Yeah.
doesn't work. And even if it's not your first, you have to treat everyone like it's the first time. I'm like, no two are the same. And so um just going in and saying, listen, I'm here to be a presence. And then once you start noticing, once you start looking, it's like, oh, this is where I can fit in. This is what I see is needed. This is where I can be of most help to this family, to this baby or to these babies. Um, and it's a beautiful thing. I think we overthink it a lot of times in this work and I hear, people say, oh, I could never do it. It's so hard. It's like, don't overthink it. Don't, use your imagination. You can do it. Um, if you could just go in and be present in the beginning, and then you will mold with the family.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a society that rewards outcomes and success and the ways in which we do things, it's hard, Darnell, to pause and to be present because
It,
we feel like we have to fill the space with either words or
Mhm.
deeds or actions. How how do you train yourself to be present? I think that may be the
Mhm.
hardest thing that people struggle with is I want to do something, but if I'm not saying or doing something, then I'm not doing anything. How do you
Oh
get
no,
past that?
absolutely, absolutely. We want to fix things, and so you know, the mantra has to be, I'm not here to fix anything. I am not here to fix. I am not here to fix. And it's hard. I often talk about being when I was in college, I took an effective listening class because I thought it'd be easy. I'm like, yeah, I was a speech communications major, and I'm like, effective listening, this will be an easy A semester. It's fine. Everyone listens. And I got in there and realized that no one, no, I'm like, oh, I don't listen at all. And it was really about sitting and not being there to fix, not being there to say anything, but to just be. And then I just watched how that changed every environment I was in. I was able to just come in, and then by doing that, people trusted me. Like I was able to build trust in that. And I carry that everywhere I go, and I remember that. And so I'll come in, and I have to tell myself a lot of times, because there are situations I'll go in and I will notice what's wrong. I'm an observer. Again, the witnessing. And it's like, oh, I know I could fix that, but that's not my job. Um, Yet, if they bring it up, if they want me to, if they ask me to, what I do here, I'll do that. But I'm not going to assume that that's why they want me here. And so that's what it is. It's reminding yourself constantly. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm not perfect in it. There time I had a client who was 21, and he was on the children's side of the hospital, and there were a lot of issues happening around his coming death. And so I'm in there, and he couldn't speak, he couldn't hear, and out of one side, and he couldn't see out of one side, and he was mostly paralyzed. And so I'm trying to be a voice, but then we were able to find a way to communicate. Um, and it was like, okay, I know what you want, and I would have gotten this wrong.
So, Darnell, now that you've mentioned that, okay, so let's say that you have a family in a room. We'll use the NICU as an example, and that you have maybe one family member or a handful of family members who are content to be present, that they are just watching things unfold. You're accompanying them, and then you have other family members who are trying to be the fixers. So you have this sort of struggle in the room of some who are trying to be present and some who are not. How do you enter into that space and honor both, but also not make it about them, but make it about the person that they're losing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I get there, I let everyone know that I'm there for the person at the end of their life. I let them know why I'm there, and then I let them know. the importance of all of us working together and the importance of community and how they're going at some point this person will no longer be here. And it's best if we all work together and if they all work together to find out how they're going to be there for each other when they no longer have this person. And so I sort of come in as a mediator when that's the case. And a lot of times that happens by um, getting them to talk about their own death, getting them to talk about their own mortality. Like, how would you want this to go? Is this what you would want? And then they can see that, oh, no, I maybe I have been doing too much. Maybe I should think about that. This is about them. This is about what they've wanted. Getting to the plans. Hopefully, and the best case scenario is usually when I come in and the person who's at the end of their life, they're very responsive. They are there with us. They're able to talk and tell us their plans and tell everyone to calm down or to step up.
Right.
But a lot of times that's not the case. And so it's how do we all work together to do what needs to be done to get this person to the best end of life as possible. And once it becomes real for everyone, people can take a breath and say, okay, yes, this is what I can do now. But it's a lot of mediation. Often I've had families where, I come in, I often talk about I was a doula for my friend who was dying and his husband was taking great care of him. But he had a family who just wasn't too present in life, and as he was dying, they weren't the greatest, honestly. And so his husband says, they can come, but they can only come for a certain amount of time, and then they have to go because they try to do things that they shouldn't do. And so, could you be here to make sure that things don't go too off the tracks? And so I'd be there and the mom would come and she'd want to do so much and, overcompensate. And I'm like, no, no, no. Everything is running smoothly. All you have to do is sit still and sit beside the bed. You don't have to go and get water. You don't have to look at the medicine. You don't have to look at anything. Just sit down and just be with your son. And she's, oh, yeah, okay, okay. And that's hard. And it was hard. It was hard for her to do, to just be there. But after a while, she finally just figured she'd come in and she'd just sit and realized how important that was, not just for her, but also for her son.
How do you approach, Darnell, if you have a room of adults in a room filled with kids too? Because in like a NICU setting, you may have mom and dad or extended family, and then they may have siblings or they may have cousins or younger kids who may or may not fully understand what's happening. How
Mhm.
do you accompany the adults in the room that know, maybe just are unwilling to admit what's happening, and then younger kids who, for them, this may feel scary. It may feel like no big deal because maybe they don't fully understand. How do you approach that setting?
Yeah, I actually love those. It's because that's the setting, it becomes this opportunity where we can talk to the kids about what's happening in a way that they understand. But in doing that, it's usually a way for the parents and the adults in the room to also understand.
Right.
Because even though they are adults and have possibly, lost friends and family along the way, they get it just as much as the kids who maybe this is their first time experiencing this. And so in explaining and using very plain language and using um, softer stories, um, the parents can get it too. It's, well, this is what's happening. This is what the body is doing. This is what's happening to your loved one. They're going to die, and this is what it means when they die. Um, you know, they hear it and they become so curious. And so in their curiosity, it fosters these conversations between them and the adults in the room, and that the adults can now answer. And so now it becomes real. And these kids are now doing the job that I'd come in to do, and it's like, oh, they're talking. And then we get to create hopefully a generation of children who may not turn into the adults that we're trying to fix, these
Yes.
adults that we're trying to bring around to death in a not so scary way. I mean, I've been talking about death since I was a kid, and I know how important that was to me in facing my own mortality as an adult. I don't recall ever having a fear around it because it was introduced so early in a space where someone was dying. And so I try to mimic that when I go into those spaces.
Yeah, I mentioned you have a book, so it's called Never Can Say Goodbye. And there's you actually start out at the very beginning talking about, listen, death was something that was part of my normal childhood as much as
Mhm.
like riding a bicycle or, doing homework or whatever. But I want to know, Darnell, what was it? I think you said 9 years old. What was it at 9 years old that allowed you, I think, an entrance into this very natural thing that happens in life and to see it as maybe a calling instead of something to be feared? Because I think when you were
Mhm.
talking about this introduction of kids in the room and how we can teach them to grieve and see death in a completely different way, um, what does that look like? So I'm curious to know what that what that looks like for you when you were 9. What did that conversation look like?
No, absolutely. So when I was 9, I was always with my grandma. My grandma was my favorite person in the world. Grandmas are so special, and
I had somebody tell me one time, nobody loves you as completely as a grandparent. And I thought
oh,
that was appropriate when I was thinking about your story.
this is absolutely true. I stand on that. Um, and her sister, my grandmother, her name was Irene, and her sister Greta was dying of lung cancer. And I remember even before the cancer, I remember the talks that she was having with doctors about no longer having to give up smoking. And they say, if you keep going, this is what's going to happen. So I remember the pre-cancer, and then I remember the cancer. And then she was at the hospital, and she was dying. And my grandmother, who never shied away from conversations with me, um, and especially about death, because me and her were the only two who were open to talking about it. And so I think, looking back, I was probably this sort of outlet for her. Um, but we talk about it. I ask questions like, well, what's it like at the hospital? How much longer does she have? What's going on? And it was never, flowery language, or it was just straight to it. Like, she's going to die. This is what's happening. This is how I feel about it. And I was able to be there for her, but also talk to my cousins who where we used to spend days at my great aunt's house, and it was like, well, this is what we can no longer do. We can't go over there anymore because of this. And so it was, but and even at that time, um, like, well, not even at that time, but at that time, my grandmother was also always, she was the community grandmother. She was the community mother. So she was always taking care of people. Um, Anytime like, it made, at that time, what made sense to me was, well, of course, all of my grandmother's friends are dying. This is the age where they do that. And then it'll be my parents, and then it'll be me. And that's how people die. And so so at every weekend, she'd go off to, a nursing home, or a hospice, or someone's house with food, or just to go sit. And I'd be with her a lot of the times, and I would see what that was like. And again, it wasn't, I don't think I thought about it in a way that, oh, this is death work. It was just, yeah, we going over to drop off some potato
That's
salad
what you
and
do.
play cards with, her friend so and so, who I think won't be here too much longer, and that was the beginning of it. This is just what we do for people we love. Um, and again, looking back, it's like, oh, of course, this is where I ended up. I ended up doing
Yeah.
what my grandmother had been doing for the couple of decades that I was able to know her.
This podcast is produced by Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit, but we're more than simply a podcast. Hand to Hold is here to support your NICU in two ways. One, you can refer your NICU parents to us for support, or two, you can bring dedicated Hand to Hold support to your NICU, either in person or virtually. Our support consists of one-to-one group and educational resources, including our family-focused podcast, NICU Babies Parent Support. For more information, visit handtohold.org and click on NICU Professionals. I think sometimes, I'll say this as a parent, sometimes I fear that if I allow my kids to encounter hard things, that sometimes I'm harming them. And when a great friend of ours, when they lost their baby, something shifted in me to get over my fear, because the fear of not being present for my friend was
Mhm.
greater than my fear of death. And so, because of that, my kids came with me. And so, we started this conversation in our family about being present for people who are dying or who have lost someone. But I think, Darnell, sometimes as a parent, we fear like the thing that may damage them actually infects, shapes them. So, how do we help people get over the fear so that it doesn't, like I think you said, it doesn't take away the hardness of the situation, but it does allow us to encounter something that we're going to encounter in our lives over and over and over again. So how
Yeah.
do you help people move past the fear and see it as formative instead of something to be feared?
No, absolutely. I love what you said about, your fear of not being there for your friend was greater than the fear of death, and and the hard things. And a lot of times that's it. It's helping people realize that, yeah, this is it's scary. It is a mystery. It is, this unknown. But also, if we don't face it, sometimes we don't get to um, experience the joys that can come from facing our mortality. There's a whole life that can happen once we say, "Oh, I'm going to die. Let me plan for this." However, it could be something so fast. Let's just get this down, do this, talk about this, and then in facing that mortality, our decisions are shaped by that. Our entire lives. Like I talk about. When I was 22, I was diagnosed with the blood clotting disorder that, I often told could kill me at any moment. I see my hematologist once a year to make sure that I'm still alive, but it was never a scary thing when it happened. It's not a scary thing now. It really makes me say, um, death is coming. I can choose this or I could choose this. And so I want to live. I'm going to go this direction. I want to live out loud. I want to live a full life. And so that's important, but also just helping people get to the root of what that fear is. It's, well, why are you afraid of this? Like I said, I have no control. It's the one thing I have no control over.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, what if we can plan? What if we can try to get some control? We don't know when, how, where, any of the details of our death, but we can sit down, we can plan like we know, and maybe that can ease some of that fear. Sometimes it's, well, I'm afraid of death because I feel like I haven't lived the life that I wanted just yet. And if it happened now, it would be it would be very inconvenient. And I'm afraid of that. And it's okay. Well, what life did you want to live? What's stopping you from doing that now? Um, and it's funny, I often tell people, like, how lucky we'd all be if we were given some life-altering diagnosis for just a short time, and then it went away. Because what we see when that happens is, oh, I've been living wrong all this time. I should go and write that book. I should go and be an actor in this little time I have left. I should go and do these things. It's like, okay, well, all those things you do if you found out you were dying next week, this is what we would get to. This is how we could live. And so it's finding, getting to the root of the fear. And there are often ways to fix that. This is where sometimes the fixing can
Yeah,
come
the
in.
the
Not at the
fixing
end of
actually
life.
shows up. Yeah.
The fixing shows up here. It's like, oh, well, you're afraid of, okay. Well, if you don't do it, this is what happens. Even with the talking about it, like we don't talk about death. I'm afraid of talking about it. Talked about with the kids. I get that often. Like, how do I talk about death with my kids? I'm so afraid of that. And I bring up how many families I've seen that ran from that, and the kids are left scrambling in the end. And so,
Yeah.
and the families have fallen apart completely. My grandmother was the glue of our family. And when she died, everything just, they are family members who don't speak anymore and don't talk. She was the one who said, you need to go and talk to so and so. They said you haven't talked to them in a while. Go call them now. I'll wait, and that doesn't happen anymore. And so if we can plan and if we can get over that and actually have these conversations, then when death actually comes, we don't have to scramble. We don't have to guess. We don't have to do any of that. We can get straight to the holding each other, straight to the love and the care. Um, and real and yeah, so planning, I tell them, talking about it is talking about death, and getting over that fear is love for everyone who we're going to leave behind. So if we say we love them, then just do it. So it's that if the fear of having a broken family should be bigger than the fear of death.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Let's talk about those who are left behind,
Mhm.
particularly when you're thinking about you're sitting in the hospital and death has happened, and now you have to start making phone calls, or now you have to start doing some of the practical things when it comes to when someone passes away.
Mhm.
Darnell, I know you mentioned this in your book when you were talking about you got the phone call from a friend that his girlfriend had passed away, and your immediate response was, what do you need me to do? How can I help?
Mhm.
Um, how do we, as people who are on the periphery, if we get that phone call, if we love that family and we're the ones who get that phone call, what are some ways that people can be helpful to a family that's grieving or going through a big loss?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question. When that phone call happens, a lot of times folks don't know what they need. And so
Yeah.
in those cases, we really have to, think about, oh, well, if this happened to me, this is what I'd want. I want someone to show up. I'm probably not eating at the moment. Um, and I probably need something to drink. I probably need help getting around, or depending on the size and the people who are actually doing some of the work when it happens, maybe I could help call the funeral home or give a ride somewhere. So it's really paying attention to those that we love, those that we want to help. I had a friend when her mom was dying. We knew how hard it was for her, and everything that she had to do. She was the one who, she had her husband to help, which was beautiful. But it's two people and it's a lot of work. And so a lot of us that went to school with her, we all got together and got gift certificates to restaurants. And, when you get hungry in the middle of the day and you're taking care of your mom, don't worry about food. Here's this. Um, After a long week, here's a spa day, things like that. Sometimes it's just showing up and sitting on the other end of the couch. And again,
Yeah.
being a witness, being present, having your, being a breath in the room,
Yeah.
playing music. But it's immediately kicking into, oh, I know this person. I know what this person would have wanted, or we've talked about it. I talk often about the best times to talk about and ask these questions of our friends, of our loved ones, these hard questions, is when everything is seemingly fine. It's,
Yeah.
the days are great. No one's dying. Everything's beautiful. If this happens, if you lost your husband, if you lost your mom, what do you want me to do? Because we can answer those questions in those times. And and it may, it may change, but we have a springboard for how to kick this off. Um, but it just starts off, in the story you mentioned. I remember getting that call, and then I just show up in St. Louis and forgot to even tell him I was coming. And I show up with a bottle of rum, and I said, he opens the door. He's like, "What are you doing here?" I was like, "Oh, I forgot to tell you I was coming, but I have rum, and I'll be here for the week. So whatever we need to do, if you need to fall apart, I hope you have a second bedroom. That's where I'll be." And
Yeah.
that's what we did. And that's how I show up still. It's, you know, I know you may not know what you need, so I'm just going to sit here and I'll pay attention and I will watch and I'll fill in as many gaps as I can.
Yeah. I'm grateful that you mentioned the showing up part. One, because I think we need to show up for people that we love. But we also had a situation where friends lost their baby, and I remember she knocked on my door. I hope I don't fall apart. If I do, you'll know why. But she
Yeah.
comes to the door and she had all this baby food and all these diapers. And she said, "Kathryn, I need you to take these because I can't keep them." And it took me months, Darnell, before I could use those things, but I knew that it was important. I knew enough of, like, seeing her face that it was important for me to receive what she was giving me, even if I wasn't quite ready to deal with it, because it was important for her to
Mhm.
give that to me, and it was important for me to receive that well. But I don't think I knew that at the time. I think I
Yeah.
looked back and realized that. So, what are some ways, Darnell, that we can receive people's grief well, maybe even when we don't feel like it? Like, how do we do that with great love?
Yeah, it's exactly what you did. It's being again, just being open and not shying away from it, not um making it for them what it is. And there's a thing that, like, a lot of times grief looks so many ways. Grief looks like
Yeah.
laughter too. It looks like, um, you know, joy and humor. And so I was watching something the other day on Instagram where this woman, she's young. I think she's under 25, has stage 4 terminal cancer. But her Instagram is one of the funniest Instagrams I've ever seen. And so I'm watching these videos and she's having so much fun and laughter. And the comments are like, "Oh, I'm here for you. I'm praying you have a longer life." And it's like, no, she wants this to be funny. And so I comment and I'm like, "This is the funniest thing I've seen all week." And she's like, "Thank you so much. This is what I want. This is what I want." And so it's that, your friend showed up with the diapers and the formula, and it's like, "I want you to take this." And there are some people who's like, "No, you should keep it." And it's like, "No, I receive this. I take this." And it's a hard thing for us. Like, a lot of folks don't know how to receive, and that goes with so much, with even love or compliments. It's like, "Oh no, it's no, no, no." It's like, learn to let people give you, and sometimes it's the burdens too. It's the,
Yeah.
"Please help me with this." If it's love, it's, "I need help with this load. Can you hold some of this for me?" And that great love, like, "Yes, I can. I have the space to do that." For so long, many of us um, never shared that with others. Like, that was such a hard thing, I imagine, for her to bring to you. And not, but she trusted you to take it. And it takes so much courage for that. And so for so long, many of us just never did that, because it was, well, they have something going on too. They have their own issues, their own problems, their own burdens. They've been in a very similar situation to us. Why would I do that to them? But so for us to now say, "I need help. Can you take this?" One of the most beautiful things we can do is just say, "Yes, I have the space to do that." Um, and I will, and so realizing how difficult it must be, but how courageous it must be, and how much love it takes to do that on both sides, really helps.
Yeah, that family certainly changed intrinsically changed, I think, the makeup of how I'm made and how I react is because we saw them grieve well.
Hmm.
And I know that that came from a deep place of understanding, and we got to bear witness to that. I am forever changed because of that family. So the thing that I feared the most actually ended up changing me, which I never expected. I was in a family that did not talk about death. Like, if we don't
Yes.
talk about it, it won't come. And
Hmm.
guess
Hmm.
what? That's spoiler alert, it will. And how we accompany people. I'm grateful that you talked about that our immediate reaction and maybe even the reactions that follow. There's not a prescribed, like, first you will cry, then you will do this. Like, grief looks a lot of different ways, loss looks a lot of different ways. Darnell, do you think that we have bias when it comes to, well, if that person didn't act like this, then they must not really be grieving, or if they come from this socioeconomic status, then they definitely like one, I'm gonna go ahead and say yes, that bias exists, but two, how do you move past that so that you
Hmm.
can, I call it the decoy argument. How can you get past that so that you can be present and love them through the grief? Because I think sometimes we assume that they gotta react a certain way, or they're maybe not
Hmm.
worthy of our compassion.
No, absolutely. And you know, it comes down to the listening, yes, for sure, and knowing that person, and the being present, but also to the meeting people where they are. It's and knowing, like, we you have to go in knowing that grief doesn't just look like falling apart at the grocery store, while just walking down the street. I don't cry every time I bring up my grandma, or my child, or this. Sometimes I laugh. Sometimes I want to just go and get my hands dirty in the garden. Sometimes I want to, I talk about in the book, go for a run, go run this marathon. And grief looks like that too. So as people who are there to show up and want to show up for other people, understanding that grief can look like all those things, and then meeting those people in those places where they are grieving, and not, we want to get there and say, you can, I'm here so you can cry. It's like, well, I don't want to cry. I want to laugh today. I want to go
Right.
to a comedy
You're
show
like,
and
"Today I was wanted to laugh. You're making me cry.
yeah,
I didn't wanna do
don't,
that today."
don't
Yeah.
do that. Like, there are people who will show up with sad music and flowers and pictures of the baby, and it's like, yeah, no, I don't want that today.
Yeah.
And honoring that, and saying, oh, you know what? Yeah, okay. Well, what do you want to do today? We can do that. I tell friends all the time, like, listen, if you are grieving and you call me, the first thing I'm going to say is, let's go get something to eat, and so when they call me and they say, today's a hard day, they know that I'm going to offer food first, and then we're going to have a day of going out, going for a walk, sunshine, blue skies, good music, probably end with dancing. And it's like, this is what I needed. And so also letting people know, like, which friend are you,
Oh, that's good.
I think that's equally important, because everyone can't hold space the same. It's, know who you are, know what you're capable of, and tell your friends, like, hey, I'm good for a joke. If you, don't make me the first call when death happens, make me the third. If it's an
Yeah.
emergency, I am not that friend. I'm the friend who's going to make you laugh even when it hurts, or whatever that is. And so that's important. But just saying, like, I'm here to meet you where you are, and whatever space that is, I can join that, with you.
I love knowing which friend you are. I mean,
Mhm.
because I think we all have a short list. I have friends that I know that I can call on days that we're dealing with medical stuff. Like, they
Mhm.
get it. They got kids with special needs. We work through that.
Yeah.
On the days that I'm grieving, I'm like, well, I know this is the person that I can call because I know that they'll be listening. So I think, one, it's good to, as a person who's grieving, it's good to have the list of the friends that you should call that can
Mhm.
move you to the next space. Or if you're that friend, like, just own who you are, because if you try to be or try to do something that you're not, you will be largely ineffective and it's terrible.
Yeah.
So
And
I
it's
do
in the
I
way.
do appreciate that a lot. So
Yeah.
when you're thinking, Darnell, about the actual some of the rituals that go around and that surround a death, and in this case, most of those rituals would happen in a hospital. How do you think about walking families through what rituals may be helpful for them
Mhm.
and honoring what it is that's important to their family because some of those may be spiritual, some of those may be practical. How do you sort of honor the process, particularly when it comes to ritual and dying and death in the hospital?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's in that conversation. It's talking to them about what matters most and how how they want to be. Well, one, talking to the people who are at the end of their life. If I'm there in time and I get the call and I'm able to have that conversation with them and the family that's going to be left behind. It's how do you want to be honored? How, what do you want to be remembered about you? Um, and then talking to the family, what will get you all through this? There are families who, want to light a candle every morning, just or when I think about them, but it's what makes sense for you, and that's not so big. Like we often think, like I need to do something big,
Yeah.
and out of the way, and it's no, but this is not a part of you. This isn't natural to who you are, and you'll want to do it, but eventually you'll fall off, and then you may feel guilty for no longer doing that. So
Wow.
let's think about the things that currently that you currently do, and that are just this is something that happens along the day, and that you will, keep up and not feel so guilty. And then sometimes say, I'm gonna do this for a couple of weeks to honor them. And then maybe on their birthday and just to be realistic about the expectations. We go so big in the beginning. And then as it falls off, it's like, oh, I didn't keep that going, and I probably should have. And so, just talking to them about it. Sometimes it's I write in a journal every morning, and I think about the life and I think about the life that I should now be living because I watched this process with this other person. Um, I go for a walk. I I buy a flower and sit it on my table. That's their favorite flower. I do that once a week. And sometimes it is spiritual. I'm a person who I come in and I can get with any spiritual practice that my client may have, and so I love learning about newer ones. There's some who want to set up an altar, and I help them do that as part of that ritual practice for them. But yeah, it's finding something that doesn't feel so out of the way, and that feels very realistic and very and helps them remember and honor them in a way that feels right to them.
Thank you for saying about I think it's important for families to hear, particularly when we're talking about babies, is that sometimes we hear about families who create foundations or they start a scholarship or they have
Mhm.
a fund where they start donating to the hospital, all of which are beautiful and can be sustainable and lovely. But I think sometimes we think that if we don't do that, that somehow our love wasn't big enough. That if
Yes.
we just light the candle or if we just visit the graveside once a week or if we just do the small thing, it's not enough. Like people won't believe me when I say that I really miss my baby or that I really love this child.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding us that it doesn't have to be
Oh,
big to be
absolutely.
meaningful.
Absolutely. That's exactly that. Thank you for that. Absolutely. That's it.
Man, that may be the thing that I take the most. So, um, okay, so let's talk a little bit about how when we're thinking about those who are in the hospital, so thinking about NICU professionals, what are some ways, Darnell, that someone who's at the bedside who's not related to the family member, but clearly loves that family, loves that baby, what are some ways that they can be helpful to that family? Because their shift may be like they may only be there 2 days that week, or they may only be there for a few hours. What are some
Mhm.
things that they can do that can be helpful that are not intrusive, but instead really accommodating for the family that they're loving and serving?
No, absolutely. And I spent quite a bit of time in the NICU of my godson. He was premature, and so in here in LA, am in San Diego, but in LA, I spent a lot of time at the hospital with them at the children's, and we and he's 10 now, and we still talk about how incredible the nursing team was by just showing up and having conversation.
Yeah.
It was like I mean, of course, they did their job
Yeah.
as nurses, but it like my friend, my godson's mom, she still keeps in touch with the nurse,
Yeah.
like two of the nurses from that team, and she's like, no, we still talk regularly, and not even about the kid. It's
No,
about
we're 16 years post, and I still send Christmas cards and like
yes.
visit with them on a regular basis. Yes.
Absolutely. I'd if I seen her in the street, I'd know exactly who she was,
Yep.
and that was just her coming in and breaking the monotony sometimes, breaking the sorrow, and just coming in with a smile and sitting down and just talking about what's happening outside of this place. Like that really helped. And in doing that, she'd learn us and learn, the baby Levi, and she'd come in with, you probably need this. I remember, you talked about how much you like these graham crackers. No one else does, but here, here's a stack. Um, and that's enough. That's plenty. That was so helpful and just so beautiful, I thought. Um, and but sometimes it's come and saying, you probably need rest.
Yeah.
So how can I make this happen? How can I connect you with someone who can make this happen? So coming in with the resources, being, this sort of systems navigator, like knowing how to navigate all these things that normally people wouldn't have access to. Like, oh, there's a extra room around here, or there's this thing. But it's as simple as conversation, simple as coming in and again, just being present. Like this is not me on my job right now. This is me just talking to you as someone. And especially if you've been in this NICU for so long and the only conversations you've had were about medication or about, the progress of your baby, or it's let me break this up with, let me tell you, have you been watching this? I think at the time it was, one of the Shonda Rhimes shows, like, you've been watching this, and they'd sit for hours. It's just every time she come in, and then this happened on the episode, and it's like, actual human communication. Thank
Yes.
you.
That
Yeah.
yeah, that wasn't about the oxygen or were they desatting or any of the other things. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't about any of that other stuff. And how grateful my friend was for that, and how we were for that. And so I mean that translates everywhere. There are people who when I go see clients, and my one client I talked about who was 21, he still could hear out of the one ear. And so I'd play music, and I saw how important how great it was when the music therapist came around. There are people who haven't felt beautiful. They've been hooked up to these machines, and they haven't felt like themselves or beautiful like they remember themselves. And so I tell people all the time, like, what they're like, well, what could I do? What could I do in the hospital that would even be of help? I'm not a death doula. I'm not a doctor or a nurse. I'm like, yeah, but you love to paint your nails. Go paint someone's nails at the hospital.
Yeah.
Go take a picture with your cell phone and show it to them. It's as simple as that. Just doing something to help bring them back to themselves, and remind them that life is more than this current situation.
Yeah, I know many NICUs have photographers that are free of charge to the families that will come and take as many photos of those families and their babies as they want. I know that has been incredibly healing for many of our friends who have lost babies. So I know that make sure that you offer that as to a family. They may or may not be ready for it, but I know that it can be a beautiful gift. I think,
Absolutely.
Darnell, I'm going to ask you this one last question because I think you may be able to speak into it better than anybody because I think you may understand the heart of a NICU nurse is that they often encounter highs and lows, and I would think the same would be true with you that you have highs and lows as a death doula. How do you function? How do you serve those families, but then not take that home so that when you come back the next day and you have another family that needs you, another family that you need to serve, how do you maintain your own sense of self and your own mental health while still being present to those families that in many cases may be going through their hardest days? How do you balance those two things?
Yeah, for me, this work is so filling. Honestly, and I was just having this conversation yesterday with a friend who is also a death doula, and we were talking about the thing we get a lot where people say, "Oh man, you this must be the hardest thing ever when you sit with someone and they die and you experience this and it has to drain you and just kill you inside." And we were both like, "No, this fills me up in ways that are often hard to explain to some folks because my goal in this work and long before I even heard the term death doula, when I was a kid and I was volunteering at this hospice even, I realized that I just didn't want people to go through the hard things alone. And so I am able to do that. And so when I'm with these families and I am um, helping them at any stage, anywhere along the way, even when it's extremely difficult, it still fills me up in a way where it's like I'm able to be there for them. I'm glad I can get them as close to the peace and I'm able to help them keep this dignity in death. And so I get to leave and say, yeah, that was very difficult. That was hard. I when the one client, when he died, he was 21, it was, and my son was 20 at the time.
Oh,
And I'm like, oh man. And I had to take a step back. Like and every day I went to see him, it was I just kept thinking like this could be my kid. Um, and I saw him in there, and why is his family not showing up? But I'm glad that I'm here. I'm glad someone's
yeah.
here. And so that part filled me up. Um, so when it was so in the drain, like it never drains enough that I'm not still full. And so, I get to go to the next clients and say, you know, the last one was beautiful too. And this one's going to be as well, even if this person fights to the end. They weren't alone. And I'm grateful for that.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Do you have any good resources, Darnell, that might be helpful for someone who wants to accompany a family well as they're grieving or losing their child?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, there are so many organizations that work that work with families who are experiencing child loss and going through that process that will gladly um, talk and have that opening conversation for you to see if this is the route I want to go. Like I said, there's Anelda, there's Going with Grace, and even thankfully we are at a point where um, hospitals and social workers at hospitals are now saying, "Oh,
Yes.
I know. Oh, have you thought about a death doula? Have you thought about an end of life caregiver?" Off the top of my head, I don't know any of them um, by name at the moment, but I can assure you that they are out there and they are ready for the conversations, and absolutely willing to if anyone reaches out to me, absolutely willing to do the work and help connect you with someone who will. I work with. I often share a stage and share space with uh, a woman named Wei Win Sato, who was a NICU nurse here at the Children's Hospital in LA. I work with a team called the Palliative Story Exchange, where a NICU nurse also does some work. And so I talk with folks all the time who are who see the importance of this and want to get it out to the families as much as possible and build that community. So yeah, it's out there.
Well, we definitely will link to all those in the show notes. I'm grateful that you mentioned social workers. Last season, so last year, I interviewed the two most precious social workers. They
Mhm.
were like a treasure trove of information. I don't think that people knew just how much social workers did and who they can connect you to. So I'm grateful that
Mhm.
you mentioned them because honestly, when someone's in a hard space in the NICU, I'm like, have you talked to the social worker? Because
Oh,
it's not just for
yes.
one type of person, it's for all people. They
Mhm.
do amazing work that nobody, I call it like the unseen work of the NICU, no one, and the hospital too. Like no one even knows what they do. And it's fantastic. So
I
thank
think
you for
that's
mentioning that.
beautiful. It's amazing, but so, like I think I mention social workers at least every other day. I'm like, you know, have you talked to the social worker? And they're like, oh, is that someone I can talk to? I'm like, yes. You know,
1000%
like
yes.
absolutely. They know
Yes.
everything. They know everything. So go talk
Actually,
to
they're like the senseis of the hospital, like, if you're not talking to them, but they know where all the things are and how to get people connected, so I'm glad that you mentioned them. I'll make sure that we link to your book in the show notes and all the other things, but Darnell, thank you for the gift of what you do and also for helping people understand death better.